MODO sculpting tools are very easy and very intuitive. Now, I'm going to kind of first start off showing you how to quickly start using them, just if you want to like concept in 3D or just sculpt away on an existing mesh, even if it's a sphere or a cube or whatever. But we're going to touch on a lot of the things that are specific to sculpting in MODO, the different tools, how to use them, and actually what enables multi-resolution sculpting, what it actually is. So hopefully you have a better understanding when you're done with this video. So first off, I have the pole for my sickle item here in my view. And what I want to do is I want to start sculpting in the shape of, a hooded character, something like death, like I commented on in the last video. I had this idea, and the sculpt tools are so nice and fast and easy. I can just come over to the push tool, click on that, come down to my sculpt HUD, which can be toggled off and on in the sculpting tools, and I can turn multi-resolution on just by clicking on that toggle. Now I can zoom in on my object and I can start sculpting away on my form. Now I can increase my strength right here in the sculpt HUD if you're not really seeing much effect. And if it looks kind of blocky, kind of chunky to you, I'm undoing that. You can increase your resolution. And you see now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And sculpt on those higher resolutions. And you can also come down in those lower resolutions and come back up and continue the process of sculpting. All right, so really quickly, I'm going to turn multi-resolution off. And over here in your mesh item properties at the bottom is the Catmull-Clark Subdivision Settings. So we have a maximum subdivision level right here, which is 4. And we also have a current level when it's multi-res that tells you the level is in between that you're going through, and then the level it renders at. The render level is going to be important when we bake. So let's set the subdivision level down to, say, 1 first off. And let's go ahead and come over to Advanced OpenGL and turn on Shaded Mode. And you'll see with Shaded Mode, now we can see the extra geometry. If I press Shift plus Tab for P-Sub, here is my base mesh. All we have here is a single polygon. I'll switch my selection, now come back to it, and see now it's selecting what looks like 4 facets. Those are 4 polygons. And if I go up in resolution, it will continue to subdivide each polygon 4 times each time you go up in resolution. So 4, 16, and 64. And as you can see, as you go up to much higher resolutions, you have a lot of geometry in between that produces a smooth form. And what multi-resolution sculpting does is it allows you to actually affect that geometry. Because right now, all I can do is select, vertices or edges or polygons and kind of edit a cage. And, get this really kind of doughy look. What I can do is click on the push tool, like I showed you before, turn multi-resolution on. And as I zoom in, you'll notice that as I sculpt, I'm actually editing those polygons that are in between. And that's what multi-resolution sculpting really is. And as I go up and down on levels, you can see the effect. Now, you may or may not want to have shaded mode on where you see faceting. The way I turn that on is here through the options. I turned off smooth shading. If I turn it back on, you see it's back. And Advanced OpenGL gives you a really nice smooth surface. A couple other things about the sculpting tools in MODO. If you don't like the way that your surface looks or how it's shading, you can adjust that by coming over to the shader tree. Let's select our material here in the viewport by using our material selection right there. And that grabbed our base material because that's really what's controlling everything. You can see it can adjust the diffuse amount, adjust specular, adjust roughness to make a better sculpting material, or I can take that even further and I can add a matte cap shader like I have up here. Do this, add layer, and let's come down to special matte cap shader. And I'll just go ahead and load it, go to load image, and navigate to the asset directory that contains, okay, so Luxology, content, assets, matte caps, and 9B matte cap library. These are the matte caps that are made by Izan that are just freaking amazing. Actually, they're wonderful. They're perfect. Lots of them. And I'll choose this one right here because that's kind of exactly what I want. Click on it. And now we have a matte cap shading our object. And if we go to the texture layers for the matte cap item, we can tell it to be GL only or to actually render. And so we'll put on GL only for now. All right, so come back over to the push brush, and I just like to use the sculpt tools to go in on very basic forms like this and just, start figuring out what kind of shape I really want. And so I'm at a very high subdivision level right now. I'm going to kill this before I go any further, all right? Because one thing about MODO sculpting tools you need to keep in mind is you want a nice, dense base mesh to be sculpting on, the performance will be better. So I'll go ahead and make sure that item is selected, which it is. Come to my mesh options, set the subdivision level down to 0, and you see we got this very faceted but yet smooth model because we have advanced OpenGL on. Come over to geometry and freeze. All right, so what that's going to do for us is we have an edge weight here at the bottom that we want to preserve. All right, and geometry, freeze, and now it froze that into actually active geometry and maintained our edge weight. If I press the D key, which is the subdivide tool, smooth subdivide, you'll notice that it does actually subdivide correctly, but the edge weights don't actually stay intact when you're in sub-D mode. And so press Shift Tab there, see they're maintained. And at subdivision level 1, I can freeze that again, and we'll get an even denser mesh to work with our maintained edge weights, even when we're in P-sub mode. All right, so at this point, since I have a nice dense mesh, it's well set up, I can click on one of my sculpting tools, turn multi-resolution on, increase my resolution until I'm happy, let's say 300,000. Yeah, that's good for where we're starting. And just right-click and drag out to get your brush size, and hold down the Control key and drag left and right to adjust the fall-off on your brush itself. And so with this combined with your actual shape presets, like right now I have sharp as my preset, I'm going to set that to fat as the preset. I can adjust my fall-offs to something exactly like I want. Like this is going to produce very kind of like rough clay tubes type of look because I just want to find my forms. And as you can see, even while I'm recording at 1080p full screen, the performance is great, and recording has a very significantly negative impact on performance. So I can hold down the Shift key to smooth what I've already sculpted if I'm not happy with it, and I can start getting rid of some of this blobbiness. Now my smooth amount is very low. I could turn that up right here in the Tool Properties panel. And you can see that now it has a much stronger smooth effect. And there's also a dedicated smooth brush that has a soft filter option, which does a really good job of smoothing out surfaces, but maintaining the continuity of your existing surface. And so something to keep in mind, the smooth brush does have some special tricks of its own. Now, if I want to use something like the Inflate Brush, I can just right-click on top of the push tool. If you notice, it has that little arrow down here in the lower right-hand corner. That means there's more tools. Inflate or fold, and I can grab the Inflate Brush, change that fall off a little bit, and you get, an Inflate Brush, exactly what you would expect. And furthermore, fold, which is very useful. Oftentimes you want a nice tight fall off for that. And go ahead and sculpt right on top of that. I'm holding down Control and see it pulls up a nice edge, or we'll push down into the surface. And so even though we're not very high res, you can see you can get really nice, tight, crisp definition. Now, really quickly, let's go ahead and switch on over to the file that I was done at this point with. And I will go ahead and turn this off, turn on our master layer. And so here's the object that I sculpted. I just very, very quickly just went in there and started roughing out the shape of a hood and the shoulders and getting an idea of really how I wanted this sickle to be organized. As I move on to the Death Sickle 2 item, you can see I've really started sculpting much further. I use the Sculpt tools to even kind of do some of the editing on this subdivision mesh, that's the handles, but I'm just kind of figuring out ideas as I model and I sculpt in combination. Now, this has a decent amount of resolution to it. I can select that item, come to polygon mode, and start using some other tools, like for instance, the Attenuate Brush. The Attenuate Brush is kind of awesome. It's amazing. I'm going to select the brush. I see my multi-resolution level right here, adjust my fall off, and Attenuate basically is erase. Right now the amount is set to 100. And one thing that's different about the way that MODO sculpts compared to other sculpting applications like ZBrush or Mudbox is that MODO, when you sculpt at the higher levels, it doesn't distort the actual base mesh. That mesh is always preserved. What this allows you to do is use the Attenuate brush to erase back to your previous state. And so this is a very nice non-destructive way of working. And you don't have to have this set at like 100%. You could set this at, say, like 3% or something like that. And maybe you over-sculpt things, and you just want to go in there and just slowly attenuate it back to its original shape, just to kind of tweak things back into place. This is great for like, wrinkle and detail sculpting like that, where you have these voluminous forms that are hard to produce when they're so fine. So over sculpt them, use the Attenuate brush to push it back into the surface. Our pinch brush, absolutely excellent. Tangent pinch and center pinch. And I will, expand that window again. Go ahead and expand my fall off here and change my offset amount to 5%. I frequently end up lowering my offset amounts, and we have brush presets that are included in the content. You can see that even using the tangent pinch brush on this relatively low res mesh produces really nice, crisp definition right here. Let's turn on the matte cap shader for this so you can see that a little bit more clearly there. All right, flatten. Love the flatten brush in MODO. I'll make a nice big fat brush tip for this. And I can go in with a low level offset amount of 2% and flatten those edges on out. And lots of control this way. This is another one of those things that bringing a sculpt mesh from a third-party application and bringing it into your app when you have really tight, crisp details like this is very difficult to capture with a displacement map. It's one of the advantages of multi-resolution in general. And like I mentioned before, presets. Got all these preset brushes you can select. Right here we have a folder for soft standard, and these are special presets that are all the standard brushes except with soft settings. So here's flatten. If I double click on that, offset amount of 5%. And so this might make life a little bit easier for you to be able to get the settings you want very quickly. Preset brushes are excellent. Okay. Now the spin brush, I find I use that quite frequently. I'll just come in on top of the surface, expand my brush tip fall off, and let's go ahead and scrub away on the surface and look at that. It's really cool. It's one of those things where at first you're kind of like, hey, what am I going to really use that for? But you'd be surprised. It actually is an extremely useful tool, especially when it's extremely large, because you can do a lot of editing to a mesh very quickly and very easily. So the spin brush is pretty freaking awesome. Carve, scar, smudge. Smudge I use all the time. I use this when I'm modeling all the time because it does a great job of maintaining the continuity of your surface. See, as I smudge, really did a nice job of not screwing up that surface, but moving those geometric details. And the move tool, which I usually set to an offset amount of 40%, and increase my fall off. And of course, you can move any of your geometry around using the move tool. And using all these tools together, as I move through these different files, I'll come up to Decical 7, and this is where I arrived. I'll come over to the shader tree, turn on my map cap so you can see this here. And, I really kind of took the sculpt much further, really fleshed out the shape of the blade through modeling. And I even went so far in the next file to kind of start revising the ideas for this handle right here. And turn on a matte cap for this too. Add layer, special matte cap. And we'll come down, and we don't have our matte caps here. So load that right on up. There we go. Nice matte cap. Very complex scene. We have 5 million polygons in the scene right now. I'm going to go ahead and press the / on the number pad, and that will turn off our wireframe for us. We can zoom in, and we can see some of these other details I sculpted in. One thing I did was I hopped in on the handle, and while this is technically sculpted detail, it's actually retopoed. I use the topo tools, which we'll be hearing about in the next video, to retopo sculpting that I did on this kind of previous state of the mesh. I just went in there and was like, you know what? Okay, where's my handles? I'll select that item. And now I can go in here, and I made multiple handles like I showed you in the modeling video. And I can go ahead and shut that off. Maybe come over to my start layers and check out one of my more basic handles, like for instance, this one. Go ahead and grab it, polygons, push tool, and turn multi-res on. I had this idea where I was like, you know what, I want to have like this demon head for a blade, the demon head for a handle. And I'll just start sculpting away on this with symmetry on. And again, this is like a situation where the attenuate brush works out really well, because as I sculpt this out, I'm sculpting relief details, right? And I probably want to be able to blend that into the blade in very specific ways, or into the handle in very specific ways. And there we go. It's very lumpy. I want to have it really nice and tight and crisp. Attenuate brush, zoom in, increase my fall off, make that nice and tight. And now I can attenuate the outer edge of this relief work that I'm doing right now. So it gives you lots and lots of control. And I have multiple sculpt meshes open in this file right now at present. I have instances all over the place, 7 million polygons total in GL. And you can see how well, even while recording, this all responds. So really, really powerful, powerful tool set. Now, blade is a great example. I'm going to select my blade. I'm going to come to my shader tree, select my materials, and see it opened up my blade group of materials. And I can go ahead and turn off all my layers there because I don't want that bump map I have present. And so I'll select my item, which I have selected, and come back to my item list. Now we're starting to develop a fairly dense scene. Lots of different things have been sculpted on. So I'm going to move this layer out of the group, turn off all the secondary items, and then this way, and also the start layer. This way I'm only working on this item alone. You see I have 350,000 polygons for this object. Come to the push tool, increase our, actually we don't want to increase our resolution. It went ahead and did it for us. But come to the mesh tool, or mesh item properties, come down to the Catmull-Clark Subdivision Settings, set that at 2. Control +/ in this viewport will enable your wireframe, like I just turned that on. And geometry freeze, remember to preserve your edge weight, which that contains. Shift +Tab for P subs. And now we have a lot more geometry to work with, well engineered for sculpting. And what I like to do now is select edge loops that are making polygons that are too long. That's one thing that you don't want with sculpting. If you notice, these polys are very long, very rectangular. You want very square ones. So select those edges that are making things too long, L for loop, and backspace. I'm going to just get rid of those. That will kill your edges without destroying your mesh. See, we have a much more well-organized mesh now. And now I can grab my sculpting tools, increase my, turn on multi-resolution, increase my subdivision level, and now I've got a nice dense mesh, say at around 2.6 million polygons, which is going to be perfect for using some of our other brush presets, like for instance the tear brush. It's one of those things with weapons, you always have damage and wear and things of that sort, and so I can actually come on top of this mesh with the tear brush, turn symmetry off for this. Otherwise, on something like a blade, it'll push through because of its distance, and I can use that to kind of cut cracks and dents and things like that into the surface. And I also can come in from outside the mesh with the brush, you see, so you get a really nice look as far as it's entering along the edge of that mesh shape. And so really great stuff as far as being able to add damage and wear. Furthermore, we have the procedural brush. And so grab any of your sculpt tools and you can actually choose brush types like the smooth brush. And this is a hard edge brush that I can make adjustments to the actual soft border on. So if I make changes to that there, bring that down to 10%. See, now it's a harder edge. And a procedural brush. Now let's change our offset amount back to 5% or so. And you see, now we got this procedural right there. I can actually go in there and add like dents and stuff like that if that's what I want in the blade or whatever surface. And if I don't like those, again, back to the Attenuate Brush to get rid of them. So hopefully this has done a decent job of communicating to you how to use a lot of the sculpting tools. There is quite a bit more to the sculpting tools. I suggest you dive in and really start playing around with things. For instance, we have sculpt masks. So I can grab my sculpt painting mask tool and change my brush size and just start painting away masks on the surface of my item and do details like that skull that you saw before. You can invert the effect of that mask right here, and if you want to change the visibility of your mask, you can go ahead and change that right here by show P sub masks underneath active meshes. Toggle that off or on. Now it's still enabled, it's still active, we just don't see it, and now we can use things like the sculpting tools to go and sculpt on top of the mask itself. And so masking tools are a very, very big help. And you can also bake fall-offs and stuff like that for your masking tools. Really, really cool stuff. All right, so the last thing I want to show you relates to this file here, and that if you'll notice, I have this handle item, all right, and I have this separate head mesh that I sculpted and then retopoed, and so kind of sculpting and modeling at the same time. And even these teeth are separate items that I moved into place. So what I want to talk about, though, is the actual handle object itself. And I have all these locators all over the place. That's what these are, these boxes, because it's textured now. And if I don't want those visible, come to visibility and turn off show texture locators. That way I don't have to deal with all the stuff being visible. I also can see all the intersections of my meshes right now also. So select the handle, and you notice I have this nice scale pattern on it. That's actually a displacement map that is a simple displacement map that comes from MODO. I'll select my materials, select this object, and I can actually continue sculpting on top of that displaced object, which I think is extremely, extremely cool. And so come over to the shader tree, since I just selected that material, expand the handle, and here is my scales displacement map that is being tiled on top of my surface. And so I'll come over to Clips so we can take a nice look at that. There we go. All right, now all I have to do, make sure the item is selected. I like to be in component mode. Come to Utilities and click on Convert to Multi-Resolution. And all right, first off, we want to check a few things. Come to your mesh layer, check out what its subdivision level is, 3. All right, you know what? That's going to do just fine then. Convert to Multi-Resolution, subdivision level 3. And now what this is doing is it's baking in a displacement map. So if you have a model that you're bringing in from an external application like ZBrush or something like that, you can bring the displacement in and convert it to multi-resolution, and actually have all those details captured and go in on top of that and continue sculpting away. Now we could have gone to a higher resolution and sculpted or captured even finer details, but all I have to do is disable that displacement map, and we can start sculpting away on these new details that we added to our mesh. So MODO Sculpting Tools, very powerful, very versatile, and really, no matter what you do relating to 3D, they're going to speed up your workflow significantly.